Mr. President, thank you very much. I rise briefly to just draw my colleagues' attention to two items that, though seemingly unconnected, that happened last week, I think are deeply connected. On Inauguration Day, January 20, President Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border of the United States, and I just want to read two sentences from that declaration. January 20, 2025. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have tragically died from drug overdoses because of the illicit narcotics that have flowed across the southern border. I think 100 people in this chamber would acknowledge that to be true. And the second sentence in the same order, as Commander-in-Chief, I have no more solemn duty than to protect the American people. I think 100 people in this chamber would agree that is the most solemn duty of the Commander-in-Chief. Those two sentences are why I was so surprised at an action the President took the next day, January 21, 2025. The pardon of drug kingpin Ross Ulbricht. I want to read a summary of the crimes for which Mr. Ulbricht was imprisoned and raise the question of why the President, who had expressed concern about drug running and said that his top goal was to protect the American people, would choose to do this on the second day of his presidency. Mr. Ulbricht launched Silk Road in 2011 and turned it into one of the most popular outposts of the so-called dark web, a hidden corner of the internet that people can access only through a special browser. Silk Road facilitated over 1.5 million transactions, generating more than $200 million in revenue from the sale of heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and other drugs. $200 million. Users transacted anonymously with Bitcoin, then a nascent cryptocurrency, and could post Amazon-style product ratings. In 2013, the FBI arrested Mr. Ulbricht at a San Francisco library and charged him with running Silk Road. In court, prosecutors presented evidence that Mr. Ulbricht had also solicited the murders of people he considered threats to his business, though he was never tried on the murder for hire charges, and there was no indication that any killings took place. At least 6 deaths were attributed to drugs bought on Silk Road, prosecutors said in court. A federal judge in the Southern District of New York, where the case was tried, called Mr. Ulbricht, quote, the kingpin of a worldwide digital drug trafficking enterprise, whose actions were, quote, terribly destructive to our social fabric. In 2015, he received a life sentence for drug distribution, money laundering, and other charges, and was eventually moved to a federal prison in Arizona. That account is from one of the many news articles describing the prosecution of Mr. Ulbricht and the pardon that was issued by President Trump on January 21. And I just want to raise the obvious question. If illicit narcotics trafficking is sufficient to declare a national emergency, then why one day later was it a justifiable, appropriate, laudable use of presidential power to give a pardon to somebody who had set up an online global digital drug trafficking network that had generated $200 million in revenue, 1.5 million transactions of sales of illicit drugs, 6 overdose deaths of individuals, and other challenges? One of the problems with the surplus of executive orders in the first few days is that sometimes the sheer number can cause you to lose sight of some of what's happening. And I would assert that the pardon of Mr. Ulbricht undercuts the legitimacy of the claim that what Mr. President Trump is worried about is drug trafficking. Because if drug trafficking is bad, it's not only bad at the southern border, it's bad when somebody sets up an online drug trafficking market generating $200 million in revenue from illicit drugs and leading to overdose deaths of individuals. And this is an action that is water under the bridge. There's nothing that can be done about it now, but if the only thing that can be done is to put it on the public record so that people can be aware less than 24 hours after this emergency declaration, this drug trafficker was pardoned. I feel like that's an important thing that needs to be made visible to the American public. And with that, Mr. President, I yield.